Exactly how much money is the Mormon Church worth? There's a lot of speculation around it, but we're going to give you God's own truth in this particular episode, down to the very last dollar. I'm not talking about rumors from ex-Mormon Reddit. I'm not talking about people who claim they have insider information. We're going to give you the total valuation of the totality of the Mormon Church's vast resources right here in this episode, and it's all going to be footnoted. You're not going to want to miss a minute of it. Let's go.
Welcome to the Mormon News Roundup, your go-to source for the latest headlines and critical analysis on all things LDS.
Breaking news.
Join D-Vay's
Mormon News Roundup.
That's talent on loan from Kolob every Sunday and Monday night.
We will uncover the truth behind the news that matters most to the Mormon community.
We're going to bring you this stunning analysis from our friends over there at the Widow's Mite Report. And they just released the 2024 report on the state of wealth in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And you can click right on the website here and see all of the project sources, links to all known public sources of information about church finances. And when you click on it, it is well documented. So here are the sources of financial and other data used to create the project models on the Widow's Mite. As you can see, there's LDS Church facts and statistics, welfare and humanitarian reports, general officer reports, commentary on church finances. Folks, all of this is all well documented from either church official sources or publicly available information. The sources here go on and on and on. Everything from regulated filings to federal forms. It is a comprehensive and complete analysis, including news media coverage and much, much more. Now, by way of background, the Widow's Mite report has been around for a couple of years. So let's look at this report, which summarizes the Widow's Mite analysis of the church finances in 2024. You can cross-reference this with previous reports from 2021 through 2023. Folks, this is what we're going to be looking at here today. Project goals, billions in investments, church assets, inflows and outflows, humanitarian aid, temple backlogs, general church wealth, church savings as an endowment, common misconceptions, temple purchases, and a donation analysis. What is the Widow's Mite report? Well, the project goals is to increase basic understanding of church finances given low transparency and limited sources. It provides analysis and context related to the accumulation of church wealth over time. It demonstrates the benefits of greater financial transparency. Now, as far as methods are concerned, they reconcile and analyze public sources of financial data. They use the most reasonable financial estimation methods. They share it in a format that is easy to understand and verify, and they seek diverse input on analysis and tone, since money talk can be emotionally triggering. And here's those sources used. We have church-provided data from financial facts and figures to statements on financial policy. We also have statistics related to church assets, chapels, farms, investments. Also, annual welfare and charity reports, BYU system audited financials, and mandated federal and state financial filings for the church and its affiliates. The report harnesses media coverage, quotes data and interviews with church leaders related to finances, policy, investments, and sources and uses of donations. We have previously leaked documents, checked against other data for reasonability. They also use professional grade tools and other resources, including industry data, federal repositories, web archives, stock and index data, and much, much more. Basically, there's hundreds of public data sources, and the models have over 1.5 million data elements. The LDS Church investment reserves now total over $200 billion. At year-end in 2024, the LDS Church investment reserves stand at roughly $206 billion. And this graph shows how those investment reserves have grown over time. It's quadrupled in the last 10 years alone. Let's look at the LDS Church investment disclosures at a glance. Like the last slide shows, we're talking about approximately $206 billion. About 30% of that is in U.S. stocks that are directly owned. And we know that from the full disclosure of the SEC 13F filings. There's also U.S. stocks, international stocks, private equity, real estate, hybrid securities, bond and fixed income securities, and BYU and affiliates treasury and cash. Notice that the real estate portfolio inside of the investments is 20%, but this is independent of the real estate that the church owns, which will be covered later. These are just the investments. And just by way of disclosure, I'm not a finance professional. I'm just a layman who's interested in church finances. The total LDS church wealth reached almost $300 billion in 2024. This is a year-end increase of approximately $28 billion. The operating assets increased by $4 billion. And the investments increased by $24 billion. You can see that in the last 3 years alone, the Mormon Church has gained in valuation almost $60 billion. Let's take a look at the estimated LDS Church inflows and outflows. The church claims about $800 million in fast offerings. The Widow's Mite report estimates that the church brought in about $6 billion in tithing. And remember, Mormon missionaries who go on missions have to pay for it, so that generated about $350 million. And the Widow's Mite report estimates about another $100 million. Now, we can see in this graph what that has been used to pay for. Administration is about $1 billion. The missionary program is about $1 billion. The CES programs, education, BYU campuses, that type of thing, is about $1 billion. Building construction, again, about $1 billion. And then we have other smaller outflows. As mentioned earlier, the investment profits are around $24 billion, with a substantial part of that being a reinvestment of profits. The Widow's Mite report anticipates another record year for charitable aid. The church claimed in 2023 in its Caring for Those in Need report $1.36 billion in humanitarian giving. We haven't gotten the report for 2024 yet, but the Widow's Mite says that it should increase by about 14%. That's a preliminary estimate. And the Widow's Mite report breaks down the church welfare into several sections. We have church operations, bishop storehouse, and fast offering assistance. You can see how much of the church's humanitarian giving here is in fast offering assistance. And that is considered a pass-through, member to member, generally kept at the local congregation level, or maybe at the stake level. All of this particular graph is generally given to other members, with some minor exceptions. Now, this graph here talks about humanitarian aid, which is faith blind, given without regard to religious affiliation. Cash donations are significant, where the Widow's Mite has documented 2,000 humanitarian charity partners. We also have giving machines, which represent a very small amount of humanitarian aid, and also a significant portion of goods donated. The preliminary estimate for 2024 is $650 million, and you can see a six-fold increase in just the last couple of years. BYU has announced a medical school, which is an indication of long-term humanitarian commitment. In July 2024, the LDS Church announced plans to create a medical school at Brigham Young University Provo. Advancing the church's global commitment to humanitarian work will be a key priority. BYU will be able to self-fund the new medical school as it holds $2 billion of investments in excess of endowment and pension assets. That's truly tremendous how much the church has. And according to the First Presidency statement at the announcement, a major focus of this new medical school will be on international health issues affecting members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the church's worldwide humanitarian efforts. And just by way of information, the current filings indicate BYU holds $5 billion in investments, of which $3 billion were designated as endowment funds. Let's look at the LDS Church humanitarian aid timeline from 2000 to 2024. The LDS Church has increased humanitarian aid by five-fold since its finances became more visible to the general public. This outcome is laudable, and the Widow's Mite report anticipates more based on various public statements. Let's look at those humanitarian aid donations. It's the estimated value of cash and goods donated by the LDS Church without regard to faith, race, or nationality. You can see that the annual average in the 2000s was quite low, and it remained pretty much constant until the whistleblower leaked information in 2019. The Widow's Mite report launched in 2021, and since that time, we've seen an increase in humanitarian aid donations. Investments still dominate the LDS Church's financial picture. From imperceptible levels just a few years ago, humanitarian aid is on track to match member welfare programs in 1 to 3 years. And here's the approximate uses of church income from all sources. We can see that investments still dominate the use of church resources, with member welfare representing a small portion and church operations and the CES and BYUs consuming the rest. Of course, there's been a surge in announced LDS temples. You can see that the total number of announced temples is almost 400, whereas only about 250 of them have had the ground broken and about 200 have been dedicated. This has led to a substantial backlog in temples. This next slide talks about escape velocity. There's no built-in limit to LDS Church wealth accretion. The LDS Church's wealth appears to be growing far faster than its ability to deploy resources. In the past 5 years, there's been an increase in LDS Church investment reserves to the tune of approximately $70 billion. What will the LDS Church do with unlimited money? There's also been an increase in new temple backlog and 5-year run rate of humanitarian aid. In a generation, the LDS Church could be worth $1 trillion. If there is no significant shift in financial practices, the LDS Church will be worth $1 trillion in a generation, of which 80% will be in monetary investments. And it really depends on how well the church does with its portfolio returns. A conservative estimate of 6% means that the church will become $1 trillion organization in about 2046. If the church does well in its investments, It could become a trillion-dollar organization in about 2040. The LDS Church's endowment fund is more capable than ever. As an endowment, invested reserves are sufficient to fund church programs forever, even if donations stopped completely. We can look at church investments as an endowment fund. Ensign Peak is that massive endowment, worth approximately $206 billion. And again, if we just take out of that endowment about 4% per year, that's more than enough to fund all church operations, because the entire church budget is about $7 billion, but 4% of the endowment is $9 billion. By applying the same conservative endowment policy used at BYU, all church programs could be covered forever. Reserve funds would grow to match inflation. $1.5 billion more could be given to help the poor and needy each year, and not $1 of donation would be needed from members ever again. The Widows' Mite report argues that there's a misconception that a $200 billion investment fund isn't that much for a global church. Well, $206 billion is 30 years of LDS Church expenditures. U.S. members following this example would pay off their home and debts and save up over $2 million before giving generously to help the poor. 30 years of expenses is 3 times more conservative than the top university endowments. Yale, Stanford, and Harvard have 8 to 10 years of endowment reserves. And the Widows' Mite latest estimate of $206 billion in surplus reserves equates to about $13 million per ward, or about $1 million per ward in annual investment profits. Here's another misconception. The LDS Church could end world hunger. 1 in 10 or 800 million people in the world go hungry every day, and about 43 cents provides one high-quality meal. Statistics imply that about $125 billion per year is needed to end world hunger, but complex geopolitical realities exist. One recent study claimed that about $33 billion per year invested in global self-help programs could end hunger on a lasting basis, but the ideas never became policy and the work was abandoned. The church is absolutely doing more and can do much more. Since 2022, 60% of church cash humanitarian donations have targeted hunger relief. Here's another misconception. Some people think that missionary hours are counted in charitable aid. About 6.2 million hours were volunteered in 2023, according to the LDS Church's annual Caring Report. There were around 60,000 total LDS missionaries in 2023. That equates to about 200 million missionary proselytizing hours and about 14 million community service hours. The math is clear. If missionary hours were counted in the church's tally of charitable service, the reported total would be multiple times higher. Confusion likely exists because LDS Charities reported total assistance until 2019, a metric which combined expenditures with the cash value of volunteer hours, including some missionary service hours. Another misconception is that the church benefits from unique investment insights. In the 5 years since it began filing a consolidated SEC 13F, Ensign Peak's U.S. stock portfolio has lagged the market by 8%. So in this graph, we see Ensign Peak's total return versus the S&P 500. We can see that in 2019, Ensign Peak lagged behind the S&P 500, whereas about from the middle of 2020 through the beginning of 2022, the church did better than it. And we can see for a brief period at the end of 2022 and 2021 that the church beat the S&P 500 for its return rate by almost 3%. But as a general rule, Ensign Peak is not doing as well as the S&P 500. I can't help but notice that this is a damning indictment of the divine connection between Ensign Peak's management and reality. If the church had just invested in the S&P 500 straight away and not changed any of the weights to the stocks that it purchased or sold, the church would be worth billions more dollars. I'm only left to conclude 2 things from this. Number 1, either a divine agent doesn't care if Ensign Peak is worth more money, or the managers of Ensign Peak have no divine insights. Here's another misconception. Members cleaning chapels is a pointless penny pinching. There's about 20,000 chapels and about 30,000 wards and branches. Each chapel is about 10 to 15,000 square feet, which costs about 10 cents per square feet per month for commercial cleaning. If members worldwide perform janitorial work for all chapels, the church saves about $200 to $300 million per year compared to the cost of professional cleaning services. This is a meaningful figure relative to the church's annual operating expenses, equivalent to about a third of how much the church spends per year at BYU. In addition, money may not be the only motive. Another benefit may be a greater sense of ownership, leading members to take better care of chapels. And here's another misconception. Almost nothing is known about LDS Church finances. A BYU Business School professor speaking in 2024 about LDS Church finances asserted the following. Here's what we know. SEC 13F filings show about $55 billion directly held U.S. stocks, $1 billion spent on church-sponsored higher education annually, $1.3 billion spent on humanitarian aid and church welfare annually. We can also glean a few things from media statements by general authorities and the annual audit report in General Conference. What we don't know is everything else. Well, that's not entirely true. The Widow's Mite report knows much more. For instance, there's annual audited financial statements for the entire LDS Church in 5 countries, which we will discuss later. There's also annual audited BYU system financial statements, including income, expenses, assets, endowment, and investment strategy. We have federal filings for DMBA, which is the church's pension program, with details about every investment held in church employee retirement accounts. We also have the construction costs for numerous temples as disclosed in local filings, national contractor bidding databases, and church almanacs. We also know the composition of charitable aid, that is, member welfare versus humanitarian, which is disclosed periodically for around 10 years in church welfare reports. We know the federal benefits filings with details on salaries, ages, benefits, pensions, and retirement accounts for the approximately 25,000 church and affiliated employees. We also know quite a bit about Ensign Peak from recent court filings. And finally, we know details about over 20,000 church-owned properties, with a total valuation of approximately $100 billion. And again, much of this information is linked in the widowsmitereport.org. Here's yet another misconception. LDS temples cost $50 to $100 million each. Well, the Widow's Mite report estimates that new temple construction is approximately $1,100 per square feet, and that the average new temple is approximately 25,000 to 30,000 square feet. That means that new LDS temples cost about $30 million on average, ranging from $10 to $150 million depending on size and location. And again, here's that LDS temple construction cost per square foot in US dollars. We can see that the LDS Church itself has disclosed the cost of a number of temples. We also know how much the Pocatello, Idaho temple costs because of the Wall Street Journal. And finally, there are a number of other sources, such as the Dodge report, which indicate how much temples cost per square foot. Let's talk about the SEC settlement. There are 9 common misconceptions about the settlement between the SEC and the Ensign Peak/LDS Church. Findings in the SEC order represent just one side of the story. That's not true because it was a joint settlement. The illegal practices were merely a result of bad legal counsel or lawyers being lawyers. Right, that's just fundamentally untrue. The whole thing was just a paperwork issue, or some forms were filled out incorrectly. Again, spot on. This wasn't just a small accounting blunder. The relevant laws are confusing with a lot of gray area. Not at all. Well over 99.9% of churches and charities are able to comply with these simple 13F forms, 13G forms, and 990 forms with ease. There was reasonable disagreement on the legality of Ensign Peak's 13F practices. No, there wasn't. Use of shell companies is a common practice for large investment funds. Right, not at all. What Ensign Peak and the church did was a victimless crime. 100%. The Widow's Mite report is totally accurate here. The $5 million civil penalty was like a speeding ticket or a parking ticket. I mean, no church has been fined anything like this ever. It was many orders of magnitude larger than any church has ever been fined. Ensign Peak immediately began to comply with the law once the SEC raised objections. Right, not at all. It took them a couple of quarters to actually follow the law. You can find out more about these misconceptions in context of available facts and data at the Widow's Mite report /SEC. A big news article was the LDS Church purchasing the Kirtland Temple in 2024. This happened in March, and the LDS Church acquired the temple, historic Nauvoo buildings, and various manuscripts and artifacts from the Community of Christ, formerly known as the RLDS Church. The total purchase price was $192.5 million, and the Widow's Mite report included it in the 2024 estimated church outflows. Now, we talked about this just a little bit earlier, so let's look at the reported donations, which indicate net attrition in members who tithe. Member donations in 5 countries have not kept up with inflation, indicating net attrition. So in some countries, the church is required to disclose how many tithe payers and how much money they've given to the church. So let's take a look at those countries. You can see that from 2016 to 2023, a 7-year cumulative change, that the active members implied by donations has decreased in every one of those countries. So even though tithing or donations have increased in all of these countries, it hasn't kept up with inflation, which suggests that active members who tithe are on the decline. And folks, there you have it. That's how much the Mormon Church is worth. At the end of 2024, the Widow's Mite report pegs the number at $296 billion. And the church is growing at a rate of almost $1 billion a week. That's $100 million a day. That's $4 million an hour. So while you were watching this video, the church gained in valuation $2 million. That's insane. Now, I greatly appreciate the incredible analysis brought over there by the Widow's Mite report. They are the gold standard in figuring out how much money the church has and what it's doing with it. Now, let me know in the comments below what you think of this analysis. Is it accurate or is it mere speculation? I'd be very grateful to hear from you. Thanks so much for joining us on another episode of the Mormon News Roundup, Church Finances Edition. Always think celestial and remember, no unhallowed hand can stop the Mormon News Roundup from progressing.
I'm the diddly whack Mac Mormon daddy. Yo, my peeps all be conforming cause it's cool to be a Mormon. I'm the blackjack saint on a crack daddy, oh. I'm the diddly whack Mac Mormon daddy.